Good morning and heartily welcome here at Exploratorium Berlin. As you can probably imagine, I'm really excited that we can now finally open our symposium, Musicians' Perspectives on Improvisation. It's fantastic that you are all here now and that we can together look forward to 2 days of discourse and exchange. You may already know that we have moved to this new space only last summer. All this took us a lot of time and energy, of course, and so I ended being up rather late with organizing all the upcoming program. And so when I finally sent out my call for papers just before Christmas, so really at short notice, I definitely didn't expect such enormous reaction with around 50 proposals for the symposium that I had received following that call. And most of them were really great and highly interesting. So due to limitations in time and budget, I could only invite a smaller part of all those proposals. I'm really sorry to everyone who I could not include for these reasons. However, I'm very, very happy now with this incredibly rich and diverse program that has become possible through all your input. 32 speakers all together, parallel to each other in 2 sessions most of the time. So this is really a lot, and you will constantly have to decide which presentation you would like to attend. Also, the individual time slots are really limited, at least partly. And we will for sure have to cut many interesting conversations and discussions too, for the purpose to go on with a further, still interesting program. But I decided to go that way, to invite as many contributions as possible. So I really feel that my original idea to make it a rather big conference and a really inspiring get-together of a great number of improvisers and at the same time thinkers, that this idea has definitely become true. A conference this big will not really become the new standard here at Exploratorium, but first of all, it is the very first symposium here in our new space, and secondly, Exploratorium is also celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, so there were definitely very good reasons to make it rather big. And what else could have been more appropriate than the idea of making the main protagonists in improvisation and their original perspectives and theoretical reflections the topic of the symposium on this occasion? Probably in earlier times, more practitioners have looked upon a theorization of improvisation suspiciously than today, but still I'm sure that there has always been a lot of discussion on the subject anyway, and where can you, in the end, draw the border? Definitely it has nowadays become much more common to also reflect on improvisation, to write and to theorize about it. It's all around actually, and also the movement of artistic research has for sure increased this trend. You all know this very famous and prominently cited first paragraph in Derek Bailey's seminal book on improvisation, where he says that improvisation is essentially non-academic and that any attempt to describe improvisation must be in some respects misrepresentation. We can discuss if he was right here or wrong, but in any case, it was still his decision to write a book about improvisation, basically one of the very first books on the subject. And his ingenious twist was to simply look at improvisation strictly from a practitioner's point of view. Because, as Bailey said, his feeling was that there was an important part of improvisation not easily indicated or conveyed by its results, a part which perhaps only those involved in doing it seemed to be able to appreciate or comprehend. So obviously I gained quite some inspiration from this approach to the idea for the symposium. This is also mirrored in the fact that we'll right now have 3 presentations as a beginning of the symposium that all focus on Bailey, this author of one of the first books on improvisation written by a genre-defining musician himself. The second inspiration for the symposium, as I already said yesterday, came from the possibility to invite the trio that we have heard as the symposium's opening with John Butcher, Luigi Marino, and Mark Wastell. I had immediately understood that the three of them were not only great and highly acclaimed players, but also very reflected personalities when it comes to talking about their art. So I came up with the idea to make their performance the point of departure for such a conference, and I'm very grateful that they liked my proposition and that they accepted my invitation for this. I decided to then additionally invite more contributors in advance who appeared to me as essential, representing the concept of the symposium, and those are Ulrike Brandt, Marina Surino, Silvana Figueroa Drea, Karl Ludwig Hübsch, and Ebru Yazici. Big thanks also to you for accepting my invitation, and thanks also to all further contributors and of course all visitors for your interest. This is definitely also the place to say thank you to the whole wonderful and absolutely unique team of Exploratorium. Max is here right now for the moment. And particularly to Matthias Schwabe, the founder and director of this place, who has put all his energy into creating this new fantastic space and who has supported making this conference possible from the very beginning. Matthias will be upstairs in Studio 2 to care for the presentations up there. I will most of the time be here to support the changeover and everything. Just a few final remarks on the program. There are some participatory elements where you can join as an active participant. This afternoon, Wolfgang Schliemann is inviting you to a controversy about the question, in what way is improvisation political and which political aspects of improvisation are relevant today? Georg Wissel is inviting you to participate in an ephemeral kinetic sculpture of thoughts. This is a simultaneous talk of 3 to 4 trios in which also musical elements might be included, also happening here this afternoon. For tomorrow morning, Corinna Eickmeyer has prepared a discussion round in the format of a word cafe where you can discuss the meaning of improvisation together. And tonight, Sabine Vogel is inviting you to a tuning-in session, which will at the same time be the opening of the open stage. Parallel to the open stage, in Studio 2, here in the hall, there will be 3 presentations involving a lot of live music and film, with Zeynep Ayşe Hatipoglu featuring Ufuk Ilik, with Franziska Schröder and Federico Reuben, and with MCD David. You should all have the program. It also is here on the table. You can now decide either for the Derek Bailey sessions and initial film screening of Mark Wastell, or you can attend the presentations of Tamti Pham and Olaf Hochherz upstairs in Studio 2, both focusing on questions concerning the use of instruments in improvisation. And Tamti Pham will in that course also present her Vietnamese Dan Bao instrument and reflect on the relation between tradition and improvisation. So let's make the symposium a wonderful celebration of the art of improvisation and of the people who do it. Thank you very much.
Morgen, everybody. Contrary to Matthias's lovely introduction, I'm not here to talk about my own practice. I'm here to tell the story of a record shop I once had in London, late 2000 to late 2008. Retail floor upstairs, not a big space, and a basement area. So when I was looking for a premises to open this record shop, I had no real kind of idea that it would become a concert space as well, or the properties I was looking at. But when I saw this premises, I was very attracted by the fact that it had a basement, and I thought, well, you know, we can do concerts there. So more or less right from the off, actually, the shop opened, and very soon after began to program performers to come and play. Normally duos, I seem to remember, not because there wasn't much space for anything bigger. You get about 20 people in the room comfortably seated. Solos, duos, occasional trio. I don't ever remember too many quartets, but possibly. But normally, it was individuals would come and just feel comfortable in the space, very relaxed atmosphere. 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon we did these, almost every Saturday throughout the year. And on one occasion, Derek came to play on a Saturday, but the month previously he'd kind of rocked the boat a little bit with the concept, because he played on a Wednesday afternoon with Simon Fell, double bass player. That was his first visit. I think he liked the room a lot and asked to come back a month later. And he talks about it in the videos. Actually, he had he'd started a small CDR label as a kind of little offshoot of Incus. What was it called, Tim, the label? What did Sorry? No.
What was it called? From the Archives or whatever?
Was it? Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to that. Anyway, so he had some CDs to kind of launch that day and try and sell, which he certainly makes mention of. But what I think is interesting about this video is the way Derek, the kind of performance, guitar, talking about whatever was coming into his mind at the time. It was all very natural, all part of the performance, one and the two kind of combined. And the fact that, I suppose, maybe the week previously he had to have a gig at the Barbican with John Zorn and Bill Laswell in front of 1,000 people, but a week later he'd be happy to come and do this kind of low-key gig for a bit of door money. And at this stage in his career, you know, was still happy to do that, which I kind of think says something about the individuals that set this whole world of improvisation in progress back in the middle 60s, you know. The filmmaker, David Reed, he didn't live in London. He would come down from Derbyshire, which was probably for him, he didn't drive, it's probably like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour trip from his hometown. But in that period, let's say from maybe 2001 to about 2006, he was really active, really energetic, and would come down sometimes as many as 5-6 times a month to film not only concerts at Sound 323, but at other venues scattered across London and also other parts of the UK. If I don't talk for too long, this is 2 films here. So the first one, very short, just Derek sound checking. Second film is more the performance that took place that afternoon. That lasts about 18 minutes. All shot on kind of camcorder. So I think both of these end quite abruptly because the tape runs out or whatever happens. There is a third film which is from Electric Ballroom in Birmingham. That does actually last for about half an hour, so if we've got time we might be able to show that as well. And that shows Derek solo performance again, but very interactive with the audience. It's like a question and answer session. And I think there's some very important things that he discusses, you know, in response to the questions he's asked. So I'm probably going to stop now and we'll just crack on and let Derek do all the hard work.
It's an Epiphone 1936 Triumph, and no, I haven't had it since it was new. But it's lost a lot of its sound, it seems to me. It still has a bit of a bite, but I think it's the travelling that's not the shit out of it. I know exactly how it feels, but it's still all right in some respects. There's kind of bits coming off it. There's some resonance you get. See? If you're ever thinking of buying an acoustic guitar, the first thing you should do in the shop when you pick the instrument is that. Tells us something about the instrument, and it also gets the attention. It's more of a hacking thing. I should mention there's no interval. Just to increase your uneasiness. But the real reason I brought this along is that this event is by way of Flechter launching some CDRs, and they're both kind of talking playing pieces, talking and playing and playing. And I thought it would be appropriate to do at least some of that, but I can't even lift that thing, so I have to resort to this, which is quite one of its facilities I came across a long time ago, which I haven't actually been able to do on any other guitar, is sometimes you can get a bit of feedback. That's not, I mean acoustic feedback. Not usually on the Saturday afternoons, excuse me. Have to see if it works. See? And do it work. It's there, but it's probably undetectable to anybody except me. I don't think there's enough. Sorry about all this. best at the top of mountains. There's also murder on there. But it leaves the guitar in a nice condition. Anyway, that's the epic London. Track which I brought here simply for the reason of reminding you that this is mainly to sell these CDRs, which are one of the problems about going backwards and forwards between, or at least I find being so conventional type of player, between going backwards and forwards between instruments is that this action is quite different to that. So I usually play a little exercise, if you'll excuse me.
we got time for the other one?
Yes, we have still time for the other one.
Do people want the third?
Yes.
So while you set that up, yeah, while we just line up the third film, some things I forgot to say. For those that like to take note of this type of thing, that was September, around about 15th September 2001. David Reed, the filmmaker, I think what's interesting about David and the way he was working in that period was it wasn't like a kind of fixed angle view of whatever subject he was taking a movie of. He kind of uses the camera quite using elements of improvisation himself in and out of, particularly in the next film, kind of there's some sort of out of focus stuff to begin with, but the way he's, following Derek's hands, fingers there, that sort of thing. So I think improvising with his material was an important thing for him. But sadly, he died last year, so June time last year. So I think really just kind of dedicate this little presentation here to him. And Tim Fletcher was in the audience in that gig, and Tim is the next speaker here today. So I think it's kind of freaks me out a bit, really, to think that's 25 years ago, this little kind of activity that happened in a basement of a small shop in London. And here we are 25 years later in Germany presenting it to you guys. So that's my pleasure to be able to do that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mark. So my proposition is as follows. We have exactly 25 minutes until the break. Then we have 15 minutes break. So we can just run the whole film. So at 11:10 the break starts officially, and everyone can go for a coffee or stay here and look at the rest of the film. I was just wondering if there are remarks right now or interest for discussion before we continue with the film. If not, I'm sure we will continue the Derek Bailey issue, so maybe there's also time later.
I just want to say it's
Yeah.
nice to see Derek again. Yeah. It's just such a familiar scenario, but obviously I haven't seen him for a very long time. So it's quite special somehow.
All right, we just start from the beginning of the film then. Yeah? Right, okay.
This was the following year. This was 2002, so approximately a year or so later.
Oh, very well. Thanks for Derek coming tonight. Thank you very much.
I haven't finished. You've not finished? I haven't started. I didn't know I could have finished it. No, I'd like to play a bit of acoustic guitar. Usually when they play acoustic guitar, they play through a microphone. Well, I'd sort of like to play without a microphone. Acoustic. And, this can present some practical difficulties. I mean, sometimes it's inaudible. It's very good, but it's inaudible. Anyway, we'll see. You let me know if you can't hear it. I got this recently, this guitar. It's an Epiphone Emperor Regent. And it's not new, it's 51 years old. It's very nice. And one of the previous owners, or maybe the previous owner, I don't know, had his initials in what they call those things. Diamantes, not diamantes. Glitter stuff. And it's LR. And I would be all right. I don't mind that. instead of at the end, whenever the end is likely to be. But when I finish playing, I like to do other things than answer questions. So, chance that anybody had any questions, you could ask them now. Smoked you out, really.
How do you judge whether a piece of improvisation has been successful? Or not?
What was it again?
How do you judge whether a piece of improvisation has been successful or not successful?
Well, it depends if I've been playing with other people.
Yeah.
If I've been playing with other people, I can always blame it on them. On your own, it's difficult. Sometimes it's not the same as. I mean, years ago it used to be easy because people threw things, and I've noticed that you could never leave. I mean, years ago you could never leave like a space because somebody would shout bullshit. So now it's more complicated. It's the old answer, you know. If it feels as though it's been good, you have to assume it is. Because if you can't rely on your own judgment, you're really in trouble at this game. That's about as far as I can go with that. But thank you, Matthias. Have you ever heard a good answer to that one?
I've never asked that question.
Yeah. Well, I've been asked that about 100 times.
What do you think about the current state of
What do I think about the current?
current, yeah, not as in improvement.
The current free scene?
No, the current pop scene.
The current pop group?
Yeah, well, I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, however much.
Sorry?
Say 66, please, you know, like how it was a lot more to do with like Hendrix, people that had a hit, having a pop hit, but they're also very interested in groups like band gypsies and stuff like that. There's a lot of good sort of replaying.
You would like to come up here?
Where it's come from there, you know.
I don't know anything about that, but I'd love to learn about it. See, I was already too old for that kind of thing in 1964. But you never know, I could maybe catch up in immortality.
Is non-idiomatic still a useful phrase?
Is that Mr. Stoley?
I'm afraid so.
There's no alcohol sold here. Yes? The answer to that is yes.
Pleased to hear.
Mr. Stoley runs a website which features, well, it's given over entirely to European free improvisation. So as you can see, it's a kind of historical thing. Where do I buy them?
Yeah. Or do you just get them for nothing?
No, I'm not one of those guitar players.
No.
I catch them off guys who get them for nothing.
Oh.
Sometimes.
Who do you catch them?
Eh?
Who gets them for nothing that you catch them off?
Well, I once got some from Pat Metheny. He got some for nothing. In fact, I think they pay him to use them. I'm not sure. A bit difficult to say.
Why do you use a volume pedal?
Huh?
Why do you use a volume pedal when you can't an electric guitar?
Why do I use the pedal?
No. Why? Well, I had the impression that that pedal on your foot, you were using it to power the volume.
It's to lift my foot off the ground. Otherwise, I'd be like playing like this. It's good, this bit.
Do you ever sing while you...
Do I ever sing? Yeah. I'm not. Get off. When the money's right. Yeah.
You said that the technology doesn't exist sort of for the listening process of like a CD or record or whatever. How you would like it to kind of happen. What would you suggest? Like something that you can listen to once and then you never hear it again, like it sort of self-destructs or something. So you
No,
just kind of get that moment of listening.
I play pretty much the same thing every time. But I kind of mess it around so that it doesn't sound the same. I mean, it doesn't sound the same to me.
But I mean, so like on a recorded medium, like I think you said something that the technology doesn't exist to capture music the way you would like to.
I'm not sure I understand you. What did you say? I didn't know. I didn't understand it. I didn't hear you.
Like when you listen to a CD or a record, you know, I think you said something about if people just listen to it one time, just really intently for that moment, kind of capturing kind of the feelings instead of something that you listen to repeatedly and maybe hear different things in it at different times. Like how you would suggest what would the ultimate kind of recorded medium be?
If you're asking me about how people should listen to my records, I have nothing to say about that. I mean, I really don't know. I don't listen to them, if that helps. But I should mention, oh no, the store's closed, is it? In that case, yes. No, I mean, I listen to them when I make them. And subsequently, I very rarely get around to listening to them. But I've got a lot of doubts about recording this kind of music anyway. I mean, I do it all the time, but that's as much an economic concern as anything else. And also, it's an opportunity to play. Playing in a studio is quite nice, I find. But the idea of preserving the stuff has always seemed a bit cockeyed to me.
What do you expect other people to buy then?
Sorry,
What do you expect other people to buy?
could you say that again?
Why do you expect other people to listen to it over and over again? Is that what you don't like about it? Record.
I don't know the idea of preserving it. Seems to be, I mean, this is a very old style idea. It used to be common years ago. Now they've dumped all these possible inhibitions and got on with it. It's much more business-like than it used to be. But I think there are kind of implications about the music which are somewhat ambiguous. Makes the idea of recording a little bit contradictory. But then there's only 2 or 3 of us think that, and the others don't say anything at all. They're no better than to open their mouth about it.
Free improvisation
What, improvisation?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's, to me, does it hold any allegiance to jazz?
It's for me. It certainly has no allegiance to jazz, but there's a similar kind of method involved in it actually. So the methods of either music kind of overlap, but in my case, and I can only speak about that because it's very, and again, it's a dangerous thing to generalize because there are people in this kind of playing who are clearly not jazz players who will insist that they are jazz players, and there are other people who sound like jazz players who say they're not jazz players. So it's not a very clear thing, but my background was in jazz and jazz-related music, so I guess it's there somewhere. But a lot of the playing I've done has been to avoid playing jazz. But I used to do that. This guitar was a very good guitar for it. But you don't have the faintest idea what that's about. Nobody's done that for 120 years.
Why did you stop working with Evan Parker?
Why what?
Why did you stop working with Evan Parker?
I didn't hear the first bit.
Why did you stop working with Evan Parker?
Stop working with it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we were very close partners for 20 years. And then I found he had a wife and 3 children. And I said, you get your ass out of here, mate. So I did. Why are we talking about, are there any more questions about musical technicalities?
Who's been your favourite person that you've worked with musically?
Sorry?
Who's been your favourite person that you've worked with out of all the people you've worked with?
Well, it varies. I mean, it changes. It doesn't vary, it changes. At the moment, it might be Susie Ibarra, American drummer. But I wouldn't work with Susie all the time. I like to work with a sort of a variety of people and a variety of people who are quite different to or from each other. So they're all favourites when I'm playing with them. But I try and play with a lot of different kinds of people. But Susie's about the only person I play with regularly at the moment, I think, without thinking about it. I've worn you out, right?
Do you ever make a conscious effort to...
I can't hear you, sorry.
Do you ever make a conscious effort while you're playing steer your thoughts, say depending on your mood, or might you just be thinking about the guitar, or you consciously said, I'm just thinking about the guitar, or you go off on a daydream maybe about just thinking about other stuff. You consciously make a point of what your mind.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know what you mean. Now, this is not intended as a frivolous answer, but I think of thinking as being not much help at all while you're playing. Maybe before, but then often people who claim to think about improvisation often think about what they're going to play, which is not the same as thinking about improvisation. But I don't think of it thinking as any great advantage. But I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but my problem is not enjoying playing, it's trying to reduce the times I don't play. Playing this kind of music, I don't play enough, for two reasons. Well, really for one reason, and that's to do with traveling, because this is the first, I think the second concert I've played in England this year, but I've got not too much problem nowadays getting work, but it all involves sleeping on airplanes and sitting in airport lounges, which I detest. And so there's that funny thing about travel and work. And then when I worked in other musics, I could start in the afternoon and work till midnight continuously, which has suited me. Now, as I say this, the actual playing that anybody does, I should think the busiest people is somebody like Han Benning is playing constantly, but he would still spend more days in an airport lounge than he does spend playing. That's a kind of success, and it's a sort of anti-musical force, that kind of success. But I don't know whether that was a question, because I didn't really.
Actors who have a script which they deviate from and improvise, and sometimes you hear comedians talking about they improvise but they fall back on material which is kind of in their head. Is that similar to improvising with the guitar? You've got material which kind of is there and you fall back on it at moments, and then.
Well, you have things that lend themselves to improvising, and when you need it, then you'll turn to that. Yeah, but I don't know much about it. I have very little interest in improvising in areas other than music, actually, for some reason. Well, what about if I play for 5 minutes and then we all go home? Eh? Well, I'll do that anyway.
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark, for bringing those films. It was a really fantastic start for the conference, I think. Absolutely amazing documents, and I think it will also make a nice bracket with the films we are going to see tonight by MCD David. I would also like to use this opportunity to announce what is going on in 1 year, because the next symposium, beginning of February 2025, will be about film and documentation of improvisation. It will be called Filming Improvising with Film. So you should already mark this in your calendar maybe for next year. Okay, there's still some time for the break, and then we continue at 11:30 with Tim Fletcher, who is archiving Derek Bailey's work. I'm really happy to have you here, Tim. I am looking forward to your presentation on the Derek Bailey archive.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just start my stopwatch so don't go on too long. So I think I'm probably unique in this symposium, judging by conversations at breakfast, in that I'm not an academic and I'm not a musician. So I'm in this other nebulous group of sort of listeners and enthusiasts. Because I've been listening to improvised music since I was a teenager. I heard it in the very early days on the radio. In those days, you know, the BBC would play free improvisation on a program called Jazz Today with a amazing man called Charles Fox, who used to introduce it, who would play music from Dixieland up to free improvisation, and had an incredible knowledge and incredible love of all this music. And that was the first time I ever heard Derek's solo music. And I did hear Derek play live, amazingly enough, in the northeast of England in 1986, when I was about 17 or so, playing with Evan. It must have been one of the very last gigs he did with Evan Parker in Stockton-upon-Tees, a very sort of industrial town in the northeast of England, even further up than Sheffield, where Derek came from. So I came at it from that point of view, from an enthusiast, a fan. And when I moved to London in the mid-1990s, I started recording a lot of improvised music. And you were hearing on the film earlier on Derek's ambiguity towards the idea of recording improvisation, as many musicians did. And it struck me at one point, I'd been recording a lot of stuff. Mark here would tell you how many gigs I used to record back in the old days. I was that's what the late great Martin Davidson described me as omnipresent. I remember there were a few players were slightly ambiguous about this, and it struck me at one point. I mean, one of them was Lowell Coxill, the saxophone player. Another one was the sound poet Bob Cobbing, who used to almost run away from microphones when he saw them. And it took me a while to realise that they were born of an era. You know, Bob was born in 1920, Derek was born in 1930, Lowell was born in 1932, and a lot of the first generation, as they call it, free improvisers, were more born in the 1940s or the late 1930s. And they were sort of the elder statesmen. And my contention is that they were the last generation pre-mass media. They were a period when live music was the music. That was the only music. And I think that really it went to Derek's heart, that this music was live. It was done now. If you weren't there at the time it was made, then you missed it. You weren't there. It was done in this room at this time. And I think John Butcher was talking about that last night, in a way. He was talking about that idea that this music works so much when you're just in the present, when you're purely in the present. And I'm a non-academic, but I'll touch dangerously on philosophy here. And I seem to remember that Wittgenstein said at one point that if you live always in the present, not thinking the future, not thinking the past, then you are living in eternity. Then you're permanently now. And I think there's elements of that improvised music are looking for, because improvised music is always different. It's an interesting thing. Martin, the late great Martin Davidson, used to talk about this. He used to say it kind of sounds same overall, but in details, and it's a music of details, it's always changing, always variant. I always think he's a variator more than an improviser, someone like Derek. He was involved in variations. And it's interesting, I was listening to the interview he did, which is online, with Henry Kaiser the other day. And Derek talks about how much he likes Bach's Goldberg variations. And I thought that was really interesting, that I can see a lot of what he did was varying. And varying responses, like in the film, to questions. I love that. Because I love that American woman, I think she was, asked that question about his idea about recording, and a recording self-destructing itself. And he didn't just say, yes, that's my idea, perfect idea of recording, which it kind of was. He'd try and look at it a different way. He'd always sort of get in a different way. So having seen this idea that, from Derek's point of view, music was live, was just now. The paradox of an archive is really interesting, because, I could see already that Derek he was an incredibly practical man. He wanted to get as much time playing, as he said, as he could. And money is involved in those things. So when he took over Incus, it kind of didn't surprise me. It was useful from his point of view to get money, looking at his own record collection. It does live up to it's about that big. And it's obviously records that have just been given to him. There's a Miles Davis record, there's some musicals or whatever, And there were lots and lots of still sealed CDs, which people had obviously given him, and elements like that. And I can see how he accepted a lot of things which he wouldn't have necessarily liked philosophically, but had to accept as reality, and recording improvised music, and the fact that he would leave a trace were two of them. And my real surprise, I got involved with the archive through the double bass player Simon Fell and Karen Brookman, Derek's wife. And Simon was wanting the Derek's archive, to go up to Huddersfield University, where he'd studied a PhD. And they'd accepted it to go there, but Simon lived in the south of France, and I'd moved out just slightly out of London at this point, lived in Kent, but I used to see Karen quite a lot socially, and Karen asked if I'd help, and Simon wanted me to help, and we talked a lot about the music, and there were elements I helped Simon with, amazingly enough, about facts about Derek's stuff which he didn't know. So I got involved with that, and I knew I'd already seen part of the archive, because I was hoping, I bumped into the wonderful clarinet player and tenor player Tony Coe in Canterbury a few years back, and I mentioned how much I loved his record with Derek from the early 80s, I think, late 70s, early 80s, called Time. And Tony, who's a real jazz player, he's the Henry Mancini guy, had said how much he loved playing with Derek. It was really interesting. He really, really liked that. I don't think he would have played with many other free players necessarily. And I remember speaking to Karen and saying, why can't we reissue Time? Because it's an underrated record in the Incus catalogue, in my opinion. And she said, well, I'll go up and have a look in the archive, and I'll have a look, see if I can find the reels. So I went up there and found the two reel boxes. And we were thinking about it. And then Simon got involved. And so I started to properly look at what there was in the archive, and was astonished by how much there was. Derek had kind of kept everything. There were huge amounts of recordings, an enormous amount of documentation, which is absolutely fascinating. A lot of letters over the years. Letter to John Cage, letter from Susan Sontag from when he lived in New York. I think he was quite good friends with Susan Sontag. And but then also, and this is so sort of Derek and Karen to a degree, because they really worked together in later years as running these gigs. Karen was a very, very important person. She died, if you don't know, just over a year ago. So like organising company weeks and just the logistics of organising a company week, you know, so you've got all the invoices of how much it cost to get Lee Konitz over and which hotel he stayed in and, you know, how much Tristan Honsinger's cab cost to get to the venue. And the incredible amount of work that had to go on with organising these company weeks, which were amazing. And it's really good. I really like the fact that we can now look at a different side of Derek. Because when he was alive, you know, I don't think he wanted any of this out there. You know, this was just at the top of his house. But the fact that he kept everything and the fact that he knew very, very well that this would end up in an archive, I think is really interesting. Because it was something he specifically didn't want doing when he was alive, I think, is that aspect. I remember when David Toop was putting together his double CD, not necessarily English music, there are lots of really interesting archive material on that, if anyone knows that double CD. But Derek just gave a already released early solo work. And in the writing about the work, he said, "Oh, there's nothing left in the archive. You know, it's all, the barrel has been scraped," is what he said. And I remember Martin Davidson saying to me, "That's just not true." He said, there's loads more stuff there. But I really like that when Derek was alive, he was absolutely true to himself. And of course, you know, he ran the record label, and he sort of used elements of what you might call the recording industry to finance his own work and to do his own thing, because he was a very practical man, but really, really focused on what he was doing. You know, he was so obsessed by the guitar. I mean, one of the things which people have already looked at the archive is the double bass player and latterly guitarist Dominic Lash looked at there was a little suitcase, brown suitcase in the archive, very different to anything else. And it was just full of notes for guitar playing. A lot of very, very practical exercises. And I was saying to Mark there, it was really lovely seeing that, the very beginning of that piece. And is it Derby, where the second one was filmed?
The second one, that sounds pretty, oh, you mean
the second, yeah.
That was from Birmingham.
Birmingham. Yeah. The bit in Birmingham, right at the beginning where he starts, where his left hand is static. And he's doing that circular, and that's a practice, you know, that's a practice. That's not something he'd normally play live. And he was obsessed by those sort of things. And there's this incredible, it couldn't really be published, you know, it was like a box. It was a bit like Duchamp's Green Box, I think, you know, the thing with the Bride Strip Bear, where it was just full of bits and pieces. There's one piece where something's written on the back of a cigarette packet. So, you know, he's been somewhere and just thought some concept, written it down. And Dominic Lash looked through there and has written a very, very interesting academic paper about that. And he actually reckons that Derek was trying to write a practical, publishable book on writing guitar, which would have been amazing. But a lot of it might have been relatively straight. I mean, I remember the guitarist John Russell saying to me that he took guitar lessons in the early 70s with Derek. And there was no avant-garde stuff at all. It was teaching basic jazz guitar. And John said that was so important as a foundation for what was then, what he then went on to do. But Derek just, because of course that's what he'd come out of. If people don't know, Derek in the 60s was a session musician. He played absolutely straight music. Well, he would play anything. There's a famous thing, I remember Gavin Bryar said, that he said, the only thing I envy from Derek's career is the fact that he did a session with Tiny Tim. And I love that. The idea of him doing that is just wonderful. But he would do whatever was paid. And a friend of mine who's got very interested in Derek Bailey's stuff, who works for works looking for programs for the BBC. He's heavily involved with BBC archives and very more commercial material. He's written a book on Dennis Potter, the playwright, and people like that. But he's a massive fan of Derek's. And he started looking into trying to find traces of Derek's work, Derek's session work, because interestingly, there's nothing in the archive. There's tiny, tiny amounts of work in the archive.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Is it true that Derek earned enough money from session work to buy outright his first house?
As far as I know, that's right. Yeah, yes, I think that's right. Which was in.
To buy his first home outright. So
Yeah.
Enough money from sessions.
That's right. That's right. I think that's absolutely true.
Which then enabled him to live mortgage free and concentrate when he was morphing from a session musician into this newly establishing world of free improvisation. He didn't have to worry about money. Or certainly didn't have to worry about money to pay a mortgage.
Yeah.
Because he had this home to live in and was secure in that way at least.
And that home, which was in a very then poor part of London, in Hackney Downs, he bought for I think £10,000 or something, is now, of course, the way that London has become gentrified, it's worth over £1 million. You know, it's the way, how strange. And I mean, he must have seen that with a wry sense of humour, without doubt. Any responses, please? I love that, the way that in the middle of the playing, if anyone has any questions, please do say now rather than the end, I think, if that's okay, Matthias, that makes things easier. But yes, there's that element that he did all that session work, and what my friend Ian found out was that he really did get to a very, very high level in that. In that, it's forgotten now, but there was a TV show in the 1960s called the Simon D Show. And Simon D was like the great chat show man of the time, and it was probably the most viewed program, you know, maybe on a Saturday night. And Derek was in the band. Derek was in the band for the Simon D Show. And that was getting to seriously at the top of your work with session musicians. And they were really no bullshit guys. You know, you played really well. You played all the notes. You played them perfectly. You did not mess about. You were on the clock, you know. And then, of course, in the late 60s, Derek just packed it in. At sort of the height, it seems like, of his, you know, and he said that his friends in the session musician business thought he was insane to, you know, pack in this very, very good job to play at the Little Theatre Club, the famous early improvised music club, to sometimes no one, Derek said. He always says he remembers at least one gig he went to there where there was no audience, but he played, probably for the other musicians who were on. But he didn't want any of that element in the archive, which I think is very interesting. I was hoping to find maybe, you know, session logs of who he was playing with, but, you know, that was unimportant. That was unimportant to him. He was already playing at that time with Gavin Bryars and Tony Oxley in Sheffield. Insane amount of travel when you look at what he used to do. He used to be in Blackpool, and then Manchester, then Glasgow, then London, and again, what he was talking about there on the film, you know, that bit at the end about Han Benning being in airport lounges. I think Derek in those days spent a lot of time in a car driving between venues. So it's interesting how much Derek's archive was curated, in a sense, that I think he knew exactly what he wanted in it, and he knew exactly what he didn't want in it. And, but compared to some of the other archives, I deal with Lol Coxhill's archive, for example. You know, Derek has kept every single article on improvised music in Melody Maker, which was quite a lot in those days, from the early 70s. Stuff I'd really wanted to see. And it's all there. It's amazing. A friend of Derek's, a cartoonist called Tony Mostrom, I've been in contact with him a lot over the last few years. And he is hoping to put together a book of Derek's interviews, which would be really interesting. So I've been sort of digging out all these interviews from the archive and getting them scanned and sending them to Tony. So the archive already is sort of in use. There's another box, bit similar to the guitar box, but called Rants. And anyone who knew Derek know he could have a bit of a rant occasionally. And he had views. He had views on things. And this is a very interesting box of, very similar to the guitar box. He'd probably make a note somewhere, scribble it on a piece of paper, chuck it in the rants box. And one thing that Karen was really interested in was trying to get an edited version of that published at some point. So I'm working, oh my God, on deciphering Derek's incredibly bad handwriting. It's, oh my God. He's worse than a doctor. I don't know what doctors' handwriting's like in Germany, but in England they're famously bad. So I'm going through that. So the archive is already being used to a degree, but that had happened before it went up to Huddersfield. There's a big reissue project of the Incus LPs through Honest John's Records in Notting Hill in London, and there's just the latest one I dug out the reels of 1977, I think, Han Bennick recording. And I've also found lots of interesting outtakes and other pieces which have been really interesting. The one with Tony Coe, I found almost a radio session which is almost the length of the original LP, which is incredible, really, really wonderful. So I've been very lucky on that, but really this is just scratching the surface. The majority of stuff at Huddersfield, and we were talking about 85 archive boxes, so 85 boxes about this big of materials, including things like Derek's whole book collection, which Karen wanted to go, and lovely little interesting things like that, which again, this is exactly why you need a super nerd, as Karen used to call me, to sort these things out. Is that I remember looking through Derek's books and seeing a copy of Byron's Don Juan and thinking, I remember that the titles of Derek's double LP in Japan were taken from that book. So, of course, looked it up. There are all the references, all underlined, and all the other ideas of song titles he might have had. And there's elements of almost like nostalgia as well of things that Derek's kept. It's quite famous in Derek's biography that in the early 60s he got heavily into Webern, huge influence on him, and he took out from the local library the Robert Kraft edition of Webern and transferred it all onto one reel, and would annoy his when he was living in a bedsit his landlady by playing Webern very, very loud when she was trying to play rock music. And I found the reel still there. You know, it's lovely. Those sort of elements of Derek's, as well as the much more serious written works on his own practice, and the writings on guitar, of which there are many, many, many. And saying here that something that friend of mine I was talking about, Ian Greaves, has been very interested in the radio programs that originally came out, which the improvisation series were based on. And I think it's different here on the continent, but the BBC, rather appallingly, until about 1990, didn't save any, I think, of their programs, their radio programs or anything like this. So there's a huge amount of sort of lost material. And Ian said it's 50 years this year since Derek did his first radio program on improvisation, 1974. And he wanted to sort of do some sort of project at a place called Cafe Auto in London around that. And I said, looking through the archive, I found the reels. The reels are there. The original, ones from the BBC didn't save, but he has. And Ian reckons they might be the only recordings. There might be some off-air ones, but they'll certainly be the best ones. And it got me thinking how I'd really been interested in this, and Simon Fell was very interested in this, about the evolution of aspects of Derek's work. And I can see how the radio program turned into the first book, which came out in the late 70s, which was kind of promoted by an LP called Fictions, in which Lol Coxhill, Misha Mengelberg, Derek, and the presenter Ian Kroll all read extracts of the book and playing along with it. That then turned into the TV program, or the reissue of the book and the TV program. So you can see how this has gone along the way from that first radio program of Derek's incredibly important promotion, because there were 4 hour-long programs for Channel 4, which was quite a major TV program at the time. Absolutely wonderful. So I mean, Derek was so important on promoting this music, and seeing, of course, with yes, Simon.
You just mentioned about it's available on YouTube, right?
Yeah, on and off.
TV programs from the 80s are.
That's right.
I think it's in 4 parts.
Yes,
And
it's definitely 4 parts.
because there are people here who won't know this.
Yeah,
We all know it, right? But there will be people who
this is very true.
And I think it's an amazing document, that television program, that reflects the book. If you want to understand it.
Absolutely, and the book, yes, I should actually mention that, because of course the book isn't just about free improvising, that's for sure. It very much documents improvisation in the Baroque period, in Indian music, in church organ music, as well as talking about free improvisation, and in jazz. And that, people sort of may have seen Derek as a very sort of almost having a sort of narrow view of non-idiomatic improvisation, which is a slippery term, shall we say. But he was very open to all that stuff, and he was really interested in the concept of improvisation. And he said in that program he only did it in music, but I kind of disagree. I think he really was quite a good improviser in different ways. He certainly improvised interview responses, which is lovely. The way he would almost contradict himself several times, I think deliberately, because he got sick of answering the same question, like, what do you regard as a good improvisation? He would take different views on it. And I really like that element of it, and that evolution of his work. So yeah, looking at the future, while Karen was still alive, we were still just sort of doing the fairly standard reissues of stuff and whatever. And the archive went up to Huddersfield just before COVID, about a year before. And at that point, Simon Fell was very much, he was going to kind of dedicate, it's very sad, he was pretty much going to dedicate his life, I think, to dealing with that archive. He talked to me about spending 10 years on one element of it, huge amount. And Philip Thomas, the piano player who works at Huddersfield University, a composer, very interested in Cage, also an improviser, was also helping. And I was kind of, helping them. They were the big figures. And sadly, during COVID, nothing to do with COVID, but he got kidney cancer. Simon died very, very, very suddenly. It's very sad, very, very sad. Because he'd done so much. I mean, it's because of him that archive's up there, And
Philip had his brain hemorrhage.
awful. I spoke to Philip just about John Russell's archive going up there. And Philip said, I'm just going in for a neurological operation next week. No, it's nothing. And he was in a coma for a year and a half. Nearly died. He's out now, he's at home, but I don't think he'll ever work again. And so I'm hoping to get together a group of a few people to help with the archive and push it on and get funding to digitize. Because that's my main interest at the moment, is just trying to get everything digitized. Because the advantage now, of course, with the internet and social media and access is that although it's at Huddersfield and, Mark's been and visited it in person, yet theoretically anyone could get to this stuff. And also thinking what to do with the website, that Karen's gone, and connecting with other websites. I was talking to people this morning about connecting worldwide with other archives, and Mark's working on John Stevens' archive, and that idea. I already do stuff with Lol Coxhill's and John Russell's, and I know the guy who works with Hugh Davis's, the electronics guy, who's an instrument maker, who's involved with a lot of these guys. And all this stuff connects, of course. You can see how all of this stuff connects together. I mean, it's interesting, we're thinking of reissuing Fictions, that record with the readings from the books. And unusually, it wasn't in Derek's archive, the reels, which I thought was really strange. But I found them in Lowell's. I found them in Lowell's archive. There's some there, so we'll probably reissue them from that. So these elements are going on. A lot of it was, it's only really just starting again now, because the executor now is Alan Brookman, Karen's brother, so Derek's brother-in-law, basically. And I was speaking to him at the beginning of the year and had a really, really long chat with him. He's in the south of France. I'll probably go and visit soon. He's very enthusiastic about the whole thing. He knew Derek and was really interested in the music. And I think he needed a bit of time after Karen died, basically, to think about things. And he's been very enthusiastic and carrying on Karen's foundation of this, you know, because Karen was such an important person to Derek, and carrying on what was happening. She was really dedicated. She, you know, Incus was her and Derek, really. So that's where we are, really, at the moment. So any views on funding? Anyone want to give me money? Anyone want to give me money? This is what would be very useful. Yeah, pass the hat around. But yes, that's what we're going to look into next. Simon was very much, I need to go back and look at Simon's old emails, because he was very, very keen on what elements to look for funding. And but because I'm not in academia, it's kind of weird. It's a kind of weird situation that I really need to work with academics at this to get funding, I think. But there's people at Huddersfield I know who sound like they're very, very helpful. So now we're sort of back up again, now that I've spoken properly to Alan. Here's to the future, and carrying on Derek's legacy. Thank you.
We still have a few minutes in case there are more remarks or questions. Roman and then Simon.
The question is about Joseph Holbrook trio, and I could find just one recording of Joseph Holbrook, which resides on YouTube. And my question is, are there more recordings of this trio?
Are you talking about the original Joseph Holbrook in the 60s? Or
Yes,
the
exactly.
Later
Exactly,
version?
the first one, yeah.
Yeah, there are. And it's an interesting thing. From my point of view as a listener, I think the recordings in the archive, some of which I've listened to, are much more interesting than what came out. My take on that is that it was Derek trying to put people off being bothered about this sort of stuff, you know? It's like he'll put out something, yeah, whatever, just put a little CD single out. You know, that's, you know, forget that. What I'm doing now is important. But for me, that's different. I mean, I'm a listener. I have a different take on this than Derek did. And the fact that he left all this stuff, you know, if he wanted none of the, he would have, you know, he could have got rid of all of this. You know, there's on a completely different aesthetic, and I was reading the letters of the poet Basil Bunting recently, and he was someone who didn't believe in archives, and he destroyed everything, basically. He got letters from Ezra Pound, letters from Ernest Hemingway, chuck them in the bin, you know, get rid of the whole lot. So the correspondence is entirely one-sided. There's no correspondence the other way. And Derek could have done that, you know, and I think they sort of had similar attitudes, but he didn't, which is really interesting. I think he knew, in the same way of having the record label and how useful it was to carrying on the idea of improvisation, that he knew this stuff was going to be here, and he knew in a similar way. I mean, Joseph Holbrook was very, very important. Now, even the recordings in the archive aren't necessary; they're rehearsal recordings. They're very interesting, but I'm sure it was the live gigs which weren't recorded, the ones at the Grapes, this famous pub in Sheffield that he recorded at, played at with Gavin and Tony. So yes, there are, and who knows what will happen with them. But yeah, it's a different thing now. Yeah, now it is archive. It is, regulated. Okay. Oh, maybe should contact them and see if they've got. My God.
Just a small comment, picking up on the Simon Fell's work. It was actually his PhD was based on the archive, which must be available online, I should imagine.
Yep.
And the title of which is a more attractive way of getting
yes.
things done, which is a quote from Derek Bailey.
Yes.
And a kind of nice sort of, in a nutshell, comment on
but
the
interestingly
importance of improvisation. Yeah.
But interestingly, is about composers and improvisation, which was Simon's real interest, I think. You know, he did free playing as well, but that PhD is really, really interesting, well worth reading. But has it talks about. I remember this was distinctly interesting. There was a bit where it's talking about Barry Guy and the London Jazz Composers Orchestra and the pieces, and how Derek had written a piece for the London Jazz Composers Orchestra, which was, it was basically comedy. It was interesting him talking about that. And at one point it says the conductor whips out a banjo and starts playing the banjo and stuff. And I remember they were talking about that, and they were saying Derek always worked with initials for musicians. God, it could drive you mad. And no, I'm going to forget his name, of course. It's gone, but it was a banjo player who was involved with sort of RG. RG was the, and I remember Karen ringing me up one time and saying, we've been talking with Barry Guy and everyone, Simon can't think who RG is. Who would RG be? And I remember it was one of those things, put the phone down, and 10 seconds later it came to me, and it was a guy called Ron Geesin, who worked with very sort of comedy things and was kind of around in those days. He wasn't really an improviser, and he played banjo. So I'm 99% sure it'll be Ron Geesin was the man. So it was this complete joke piece of an orchestra going, I think an orchestra rebelling against the conductor, and the conductor, getting a banjo out and sort of. So completely ridiculous, and I love that element. Steve Beresford said that about the early days when he was at York, and a friend of his wrote a piece for Derek, and Derek goes, "Oh yeah, very nice, very nice," and then just ignored it completely and improvised. And I think apart from one bit where I think the guitarist was meant to scream, and Derek went, "Oh," or something like that, sort of. And Steve said, the guy was like, "What's going on?" And I think they hadn't realised. I think Derek was a true devotee of live improvisation, more than just about anyone else. But at the same time knew that when he was gone, there was no more live improvisation from Derek Bailey. But what there was left is the archive and the films. And there's loads of films as well, lots of video in the archive, lots of videos. You with Cecil Taylor and all sorts of people. I mean, I've not even touched on the Derek's geographical jaunts. He nearly moved to New York in the early 80s because he loved the music situation there so much and had such a great relationship with John Zorn. John Zorn was sorting all sorts of stuff, and he was going to move there. I think the flat fell through. But, and his relations with Japan, of course, very, very important. He went to Japan way before a lot of other improvisers. And there's so much there. I mean, I've really, as I say, just scratched the surface of what there is. And, yeah. Oh. Fantastic. The true anarchist, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that work with Mintanaka is fascinating. I'm really hoping there's going to be more videos, because they did a trio with Milford Graves, which toured Japan, which was, you know, extraordinary lineup, you know, and yeah, we'll see if there's anything from, I really hope there's videos from that. We shall see.
Thank you so much, Tim, for this presentation. When we were emailing, the question came up, how long should the presentation be? And you said you could talk about the archive for hours. And I'm sure that we could also listen to you for hours, because it's so interesting and it's really such an important work that you do. And the question is also huge here in Berlin, of course, because it's an unsolved question. How we are dealing with the culture of improvisation and how to keep the memory of all that. So thank you so much. We're going to continue also with Bailey, but also with Stockhausen and Braxton, with Roman Stolyar. Maybe there's still time to get a quick coffee or so, but we'll continue in 3 minutes, yeah? Okay. Thank you, Tim, first of all. Okay, then we go on with Roman Stolyar. I kind of included this in the Derek Bailey morning. And yeah, it's Bailey, Stockhausen, Braxton, 3 structural approaches to free improvisation.
Thank you very much. My name is Roman Stolyar, and let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm originally from Russia. I was born in West Siberia, and I lived for a long time in West Siberia, and then I moved in St. Petersburg, and I lived there. And because of the war and repressions happening in Russia, I was forced to flee from Russia. So now I probably should introduce myself as Roman Stolyar from Berlin, because now I'm 1 year here. And almost all my life I've been involved into music improvisation. I started my music education with jazz music. I graduated from musical college in Novosibirsk in West Siberia as a jazz piano player. Then I graduated from conservatory as a composer. But I entered conservatory on purpose because I wanted to learn more structures to apply in my improvisations as a pianist, and it changed a lot in my playing, studying composition. And I started, after graduation from conservatory, I started playing quite a lot in different ensembles with different improvisers. Luckily, I had an opportunity to play internationally in the US and in Europe, and I met many improvisers, and I played with many interesting improvisers, and they changed a lot in my manner of playing. And at some point, I started interested in the different conceptions of improvisation. And finally, in 2020, I should say I'm very grateful to Corona time, because I had a time to concentrate on writing a book about the history of improvised music in the West in the second half of 20th century. And this topic seemed to me very important to publish this book in Russian, because in Russia we have pretty limited, we still have pretty limited knowledge about what is improvisation, though there are some really good communities in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. But in the academic field, we still don't have much about free improvised music. So I was really lucky that I had an opportunity to publish this book in 2021. And actually, Mark, you also mentioned in this book, so it's really nice to really nice to meet you in person here. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's still in Russia. It's still in Russian, but I hope we'll make it later on in English or in German. We'll see. we'll see. So now it's a bit problematic. So, and during preparing materials for this book, I passed through many documents, and I spent almost 66 years to prepare all these materials. And I started thinking and started reflecting on my playing in a context of what I learned from these documents, because I read these papers related to Cornelius Cardew and Braxton and Stockhausen and Vinko Globokar and so many, many outstanding improvisers. And I started asking myself about my kind of playing and about what I can take from all these papers, all these conceptions, all these approaches to pre-improvisation. And same time, I tried to make a sort of a, so to say, the historical scale, the chain of events happening in free improvised music since 60s, even mid-50s. And I noticed an interesting thing that roughly, we can do it roughly like 60s, 70s, 80s in the US and in Europe. So in 60s, there was, to my opinion, there was a tendency of making as much freedom as possible in playing. Then 70s came, and several conceptions of free improvisation appeared as a tool of, it still sounds very weird to me, as a tool to limit the possibilities of an improviser in order to fit the certain, I should say, style. And it's an interesting thing because on the one hand, we are improvisers, and on the other hand, it seems that we require something, some quality of the sound, some quality of structures used in improvisation. And it was a really interesting thing to me. And I just recalling the funny thing which was mentioned in the book. It's probably the first book about free jazz published in 70s by Ekkehard Jost. And the book starts from anecdote. There was a guy, the saxophone player, who came to the jam session, the free jam, the gathering of free improvisers. And he asked someone, and he asked, is it really so that I can play anything? And the reply was yes, and he started playing Christmas tunes. And he was absolutely out of the context, you know, and finally he was thrown away somehow. So this is actually an interesting question, the understanding of freedom. If you talk about free improvisation, what kind of freedom do we mean? Is it freedom of what, or from what? So it's still very controversial, and I found this three conceptions of free improvisation we are going to talk. I'm going to talk about briefly because I'm pretty sure that the topic is very known to the audience, and there are people in the audience that they know much more about this topic than myself. I'm just presenting my view on these three approaches to free improvisation. All these three approaches are very attractive to me, and same time, all these three approaches have certain limitations, and I still have lots of questions to every of these approaches. So we start from Derek Bailey, but actually I'm very grateful to him because I don't need to talk much about it because you already have done everything, almost everything. But I would love to concentrate to the term of idiomatic and non-idiomatic improvisation. So as you can see, it's a quote from Derek Bailey's book, Improvisation. Idiomatic improvisation, much the most widely used, is mainly concerned with the expression of an idiom, such as jazz, flamenco, or baroque, and takes its identity and motivation from that idiom. Non-idiomatic improvisation has often other concerns. This is very interesting. Non-idiomatic improvisation has other concerns, and is most usually found in so-called free improvisation, and while it can be highly stylized, is not usually tied to representing an idiomatic identity. And this is probably the most questionable thing to me. And when I started exploring Derek Bailey's method of non-idiomatic improvisation, on the one hand, I found it very useful for as a tool of getting rid of cliches. Like if you forbid yourself to play, for example, triads, or for example, scales, the clear scales, or you notice, for example, as I am a pianist, and then noticed, okay, I repeat this phrase over and over again last couple of years, so I should get rid of it. So, and I should put my some filter in my mind and to my playing. So this is really a really useful tool for this if you think this way. On the other hand, the question is, can we be free from any kind of idiom? This is very questionable, and I remember the quote coming from another guitar player, Elliot Sharp, whom I talked to when I was in the US and I played in his ensemble, and he is kind of critical to Derek Bailey and has said that the ideal performer, the ideal improviser who can play non-idiomatic improvisation is a person who has just 5 minutes of memory. And after 5 minutes, he forgets everything and starts playing from scratch. So we are not of this kind, of course, and we are constantly repeating some elements we use in improvisation. And I found a very interesting article written by Tim Hodgkinson with a brilliant explanation of what non-idiomatic improvisation is. And I have to quote it. So, what free improvisation, as articulated by Derek Bailey, for example, held up against jazz and pitted against jazz and real improvisation, was another way of breaking down material, the way that came out of European serialism and the breakdown of tonal system. So further on, Tim Hodgkinson wrote that, and it's very close to my feeling. He wrote that there are two levels, micro level and a macro level. So on micro level, we use these structures borrowed from really different styles, but these structures are very short, and not all people realize that they are these are quotes. But on the macro level, we combine the structures freely, really freely, and it's very close to definition of improvisation, the general definition of improvisation, which has come from Russian musicologist Mikhail Saponov, who is still teaching in Moscow Conservatory, and he suggested a definition for improvisation. Improvisation is a free combination of prepared models. So this explanation made by Tim Hodgkinson is very, very close to this definition. This is probably what we all do unconsciously. We borrow structures from different idioms on a micro level, and we combine them freely on a macro level. So this, to me, this definition sounds very, very satisfactory. And in this way, if we think about non-idiomatic improvisation, of course, if we perceive this term literally, it doesn't work. But if we think about this, two levels of creating music, it works pretty good. So I found this, the way of explanation like this, I found it very productive, and it's very, very understandable to me. Somehow there is a connection between Derek Bailey's conception of non-idiomatic improvisation and Stockhausen's conception of intuitive music. Of course, there are huge differences, huge differences. First of all, Stockhausen dedicated himself into intuitive music only 5 years of his life, and then after that, after 73, he rejected this method openly. Second, the differences, if we consider Derek Bailey's approach as a more rational one, and to play non-idiomatic music, you have to have a certain degree of control of your actions, of the intellectual control. And Stockhausen's approach appeals to intuition. And it's a very mystical thing. Stockhausen explained that he started exploring this idea of intuitive music when he realized that he wanted to keep this feeling, this state of intuitive composing as long time as he could keep it. So he started developing this conception of intuitive music, but his approach is rather an approach coming from composer rather than improviser, because he wrote these instructions these scores from the 7 days, very, very famous text scores, and this is really lovely, and I should read it, because after that I'll give you some example related to this score. Think nothing, wait until it's absolutely still within you. When you have attained this, begin to play. As soon as you start to think, stop and try to retain the state of non-thinking. Then continue playing. And this was one of the most problematic scores when in 1969 the group of improvisers led by Stockhausen recorded the cycle of text scores. And it was a huge argument between Stockhausen and the group of improvisers, including Vinko Globokar and Michel Portal. And Vinko Globokar, it's a quote from his interview. We had some strong disagreement in Darmstadt in '69 when we were recording Aus den 7 Tagen. When you are sure that you are thinking of nothing, play. When you think, stop playing. What's wrong with this poetic intention? In that case, I'm the only person who knows whether I'm thinking or not. Since there is no written music, it means that I play what I want and not what the composer wishes. So Stockhausen insisted on a certain form of sounds, of how it should sound, while Globokar and Portal were absolutely disagree with him because really, as Vinko Globokar said, only musicians know when they keep this state of thinking or non-thinking. So Stockhausen acted as a composer, and this is probably the reason when he finally gave it up, because he couldn't control it. As a composer, he couldn't control it. So he just left it up. But that's an interesting thing that now we have these text scores, and we can interpret them as impulses for improvisation. And we can do whatever we want with these scores, using them like as instructions and understanding terms Stockhausen used in our own way. And I had an interesting talk with Carl Bergström Nielsen, the Danish composer, who composes more than 35 years, I think. He composes music and graphic scores and text scores. And he said, yeah, Stockhausen composed so many things, and now we can use it as a start to improvise. And this is really a positive thing in this intuitive music. We probably don't need to think much about the state of thinking or non-thinking, but still we can use these things as an impulse in improvised music. And the third conception seems very, very impressive to me, since I started exploring the conception of Anthony Braxton, who is still very, very active in the US and abroad. And this is probably the very rare example of the conception, the approach which is developing more than 50 years. So Anthony Braxton is still working on developing on this conception further during more than 50 years. And that was interesting how Braxton started to develop in this conception when he was very young, and he was going to play his solo concert of total improvisation. And he thought that it would be very easy to do. It would be very easy to do. He had 1 hour of playing on stage, and and when he came on stage and played just 10 minutes, he suddenly realized that he had nothing to tell anymore, because he already spent his vocabulary. And since that time, he started developing slowly but surely his conception. First of all, that the first stage was 12 language types by long sounds, ascended long sounds, trill, and so on. Number 12 is very interesting, as sub-identity forms that actually literally means that anything can happen. So that 11 elements are very clearly defined, while the element number 12 is totally open. And it's interesting that Braxton used these elements, and he's still using in his scores. And it's a sort of a very fundamental thing from which he started his approach to free improvisation, and not only to improvisation, actually, to composition as well. So these are 4 fundamental postulates. All compositions regarding music of Anthony Braxton, written by himself. All compositions in my music system connect together. All instrumental parts in my group of music are autonomous. All tempos in this music state are relative or negotiable. And all volume dynamics in the sound world are relative. So the further on, in the beginning of 80s, Anthony Braxton developed his three-centric conception. And you can see an explanation coming from Braxton. So there are 3 basic elements: composition, improvisation, and what is called transformation here. It's a ritual ceremonial music. This is 3rd component of Braxton's three-centric conception. Composition presents past, improvisation presents present, and this ritual ceremonial part of music presents the future. Composition relates to experience, improvisation manifests thought, according to Braxton, and ritual music manifests intuition. So we can see here, which is very interesting to me, that Bailey's view and Stockhausen's view are becoming the organic part of Braxton's conception, which is very interesting. And another thing which is very interesting to me is the term trans-idiomatic approach, or trans-idiomatic improvisation. It naturally contradicts to Derek Bailey's term non-idiomatic improvisation, while Bailey insisted on getting rid of any kind of idioms. Braxton embraces all kinds of idioms, and so any kind of idiom can appear in improvisation as well as in composition. So the tendency of this approach is to make this music universal, but not only improvisation, but also a composition, because for Braxton there is no contradiction between improvisation and composition. So they are related to each other. They are contributing into each other. And starting from 90s, Braxton developed another thing as an addition to his conception, the ghost trance music, which is actually a very interesting thing, and it's once again it's a continuation of developing of his conception of three-centric approach in music. So you can see here there's primary material, secondary material, and tertiary material. And the conception of primary material is based on, as Braxton explained, long composed melodies based on a sequence of mostly staccato notes, but same time he also used legato and many other different things. And it's written in so-called, if we could make a closer look to this a quote from the score, it's written in so-called diamond clef. It means that you can move, you can transpose it freely. And secondary material is mostly based on these 12 elements which we have seen before. And the last compositions of Braxton own corpus of works, so you can move these compositions freely, you can use these compositions freely, and you can use different parts from these compositions, you can use different quarters and so on. And finally, I want to show you this a sort of a comparison of these three conceptions: idiomatic, non-idiomatic improvisation, Bailey, intuitive music of Stockhausen, and trans-idiomatic and the three-centric approach of Braxton. I probably don't need to read it aloud because it's pretty clear. And I wanted to make it as short as I can do because I'm interested into feedback, and if you have any questions or any remarks to this, please do it, because it's really important for me to have a sort of feedback and to make this presentation alive. Thank you very much for listening.
Interesting what you said right at the beginning there about it almost being 60s, 70s and 80s. And I wondered if you thought there was anything almost socially involved in that sense, in the way, certainly in the Western world, whether that almost intuitively or in unconscious way influenced some of these ideas of it being much freer in the 60s, almost an economic thing. Wonder if there's anything there.
Well, I think there's a very important thing, the political movements of 60s, which actually made possible the appearance of improvised music itself. And we can probably start from free jazz in 59 and 60. And then the groups of improvisers in Italy and in the UK, like in Italy, the Nuova Consonanza and Musica Elettronica Viva, of course, yeah, and the AMM and Scratch Orchestra in the UK. So there was really great political movements, first of all. But the thing is that in 70s, beginning of 70s, the interesting things happened with these groups like Musica Elettronica Viva and Frederick Jewski, mostly Frederick Jewski, developed this score called Sound Pool, in which more than 600 people could be involved, and they made this, these performances with the spectators and so on. And Cornelius Cardew did nearly the same with Scratch Orchestra involving people. But in the 70s, the great disappointment came from the members of this group, like Cornelius Cardew stopped doing free improvisation at all, and he wrote this, this well-known document, the Stockhausen serves imperialism, and he started playing these work songs and so on. And same thing, almost the same thing happened with Musica Elettronica Viva. They stopped doing sound pool. They were very disappointed by this a huge degree of freedom. So, and it's interesting that since that time, these different conceptions of free improvisation started appearing, and in order to regulate the actions coming from musicians. And in the 80s is the appearance of different techniques of conducted improvisation, like sound painting and Butch Morris and John Zorn's Cobra. So this is rough. That's pretty rough picture of what happened in the history of free improvisation in the West.
I like your table, and I'd like to add two other rows. The last row is about the role of a personality, and I think talking about this music, it's very important to have to speak about the role of a community, especially when we're in Berlin. I think everybody knows in this room the big book, which has a subtitle on Echtzeitmusik. It's called Describing a Scene. And I think the interaction of different scenes are really important. And another thing is maybe the role of a tradition, which is, I think, a little bit different from what we are guessing, which means idiomatic or non-idiomatic, because it's going deeper in the time scales, maybe as an example, for example, talking about Echtzeitmusik, to my generation, there was a cruel misunderstanding that this music is more about limitations and reductionism. For me, it was massively an extension and of what I learned from all the musicians of the generations before, of the first generations, people like Derek Bailey, Tony Oxley, etc., and also the second generation, I would say, people like Mr. Butcher and Phil Darrant and from all other countries. So the parameters in music, in art forms, general in art forms, were really extended at that time after 1990, I would say. It started earlier, and I think there are good examples that you said, but this is what's something I wanted to add to this table, the community thing, and also that we are really aware of a tradition that really is something. Nowadays we would not say it's not only mankind, because we knew that animals and plants are much more intelligent in a certain way than the human beings. I think they are last in the row. So but thanks. I think this is it's a good addition. And
thank you very much for the addition. And if I had an opportunity to talk about this, this time scale about coming from 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, were really specific because of appearance of reductionism, which actually was a sort of a thing which was contradicted to the previous, I should say, sound of free improvisation, like much less intense, much more space. And it's but it was really interesting to me when I started exploring all these documents, and I started reading this interview in order to prepare my book, and I read the quote from Misha Mengelberg, who was criticizing the previous the music, the free improvised music of 70s and 80s, in the same almost the same manner as people who started reductionism made it. You know, it's like he said that although the free improvisation should sound like very intense, and we shouldn't use this and that. No, it's a dictatorship. No, I should reject it, and so on. So and we could continue actually.
Mischa Mengelberg, I think it's a very good example. Maybe we should put someone like him here. A friend of mine who wrote a book on Thelonious Monk and free jazz, he's called Jürgen Arndt. He met Mischa Mengelberg in Hanover, and he asked about his approach. And Mengelberg said, "I never want to repeat myself when I'm playing a piano solo." And this is something, it's like another kind of utopia than the freedom of music, to say, I'll never play the same again. And if you ever watch the performances of him and Han Benning, that you can realize what this all about.
This is interesting how we should finish now. I just need to tell just one thing. The last chapter of my book is called "Still More Questions Than Answers." So we are really lucky that we are still having questions about improvised music. You know, about the essence of improvised music. It's a great sign that the improvised music is alive. To me, at least.
Yes.
So thank you very much, and we can continue outside.
Yeah, maybe one last question, and then we'll have lunch.
It's not so much a question as a comment, but this reference to Excite and reductionism, I kind of have a problem with this because I came to improvised music through hearing Derek Bailey and John Stevens and AMM. And AMM were reductionist for decades before the word was ever used. And John Stevens and Trevor Watts were playing concerts where almost nothing happened, like really long pieces that were very quiet, full of silence. So I disagree with the idea that reductionism comes after free jazz somehow in the pantheon. I think was an element of free improvisation always from the beginning. I don't hear people saying that, so I just thought there's a microphone. I'm going to say it out loud.
Now, may I just add? Mark,
just
please.
Briefly, just to say that's something that Martin Davidson said all along. You know, when my generation was getting into that sound world, Martin said it's been around since day one. So yeah, good point. Good point.
But it was an outlier, that sort of music. It was an outlier. You know, it was unusual that AMM and the duo, because the duo with Trevor and John Stevens then would also be playing like Amalgam, which would be much more straight jazz. You know, so it wasn't. They were both unusual takes on improvised music, which was much more of the sort of idiom of Derek and Evan and Rutherford and those guys. So AMM in particular were very unusual. Oh yeah, yeah.
I remember seeing a young saxophone player in the 80s called John Butcher, who played very, very quiet, very focused concerts, which had nothing to do with the idea that we have about improvised music.
I just wanted to add just very short remark that we talk about reductionism in 90s, not probably mostly as a movement, because it was a movement at 90s. And I can give you the concept, but of course there are many examples of we could call reductionism before that. And it sounds to me like mentioning Lenny Tristana as the first free jazz player, but he made it in 1949, 10 years before the term free jazz appeared. And it's still, it's another problematic thing. Was Lenny Tristana creator of free jazz or not? But as a movement, it appeared in the 60s.
Yeah. So. And I think that there's one term that should be added at this point. I mentioned Echtzeit, maybe from a personal experience when I watched Derek Bailey in, I think, in 1994 something. He played at the Schwangere Auster. Maybe most of you know this place. He played with the DJ. And this concert ended up that Derek Bailey stood up and took the hand of the DJ. Tim, can you help me? It's like this, you know? He has won the race. He was a winner. So after the concert, I went out and I had, I think, 500 meters to go to a place where Wolfgang Fuchs had this group called The Factory. Young musicians of my age. And I think they came from his approach, but these young players were very specific of what they were doing. There was Mark Sanders was there and doing an incredible thing. Robin Hayward was there. They moved from England to Berlin, and Andrea Neumann was there. I think Annette Krebs not, but for me, as someone who believed in an avant-garde at that time, got the feeling, it's still alive. And I think this happened again and again, that the younger generations know that they're aware of what you said. We had the Polwechsel anniversary here in this room, celebrated a few months ago, and I think people like Duffeldecker, etc., they know of AMM, but they really try to extend it maybe in another way. So this is maybe the other thing when I'm talking about tradition and bringing things probably to an end, like Derek Bailey, that it did not work anymore, the music he did at the Schwangere Auster. Also, it was a success for him, and I got the feeling he will do it again and again. And it was different, for example, from his duet concert with Cecil Taylor. I think it's the most important meeting of them, and I think it was in '88 here at the FMP Festival, released as Plasticine mit Wasser. So maybe this is an interesting point, that tradition and utopian ideology then it's not lost in a
All right, let's continue the discussion during lunch. Very big thanks to Roman. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you. Okay, most of you know probably it goes like this. We don't have the capacity to invite everyone for lunch, so we decided to simply have the participants, the active presenters, contributors here in the restaurant. We ask everyone else to find something else around in the area. There's plenty of great restaurants, and we will continue here at 2:30 on both stages, of course. See you later.